Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 59 of Lore Alerts. So far titled Alexander Part 1. This is actually something that I'm sure Atlas has talked to me about before, and I'm sure that I forgot. And once he says it, I'm going to go, oh,
No,
yeah, we'll see.
no, I don't think so.
Oh, maybe, okay.
I
That
think
just
this is
happens a
new.
lot.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's so many ideas, and we're almost at episode 60, which is crazy.
I know. I'm glad
So,
it's just something fun to do for us, I think, every week. We just,
yeah,
both of us enjoy different parts of it.
it's good to
Like,
have my mind set to something, you know?
it's healthy, yeah. And I
I'm
have to
always,
edit it every week.
and it's going deep into looking at things in different languages and listening to audiobooks written by madmen. It's a fun time, but I never would have otherwise. So, it's kind of cool,
And
I
I
guess.
play a lot of Zelda.
You play a lot of Zelda and watch a lot of anime.
That's true. Not a lot of anime. I
am
watch
actually.
a decent amount.
I'm doing my first anime episode's on the way. It's
Oh,
I was actually talking to your roommate, Lilin, about my first anime episode.
is
Which,
is it her favorite?
No, it's Gundam.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. That makes sense.
I've watched I think every Gundam show in the past since the summer. I started watching the original, and then I wrecked it all. I consumed it all. Which
So
I've
now
seen
it's
them all before, but now it's like
Right.
I've done it again.
Compartmentalized as well.
Yeah,
So.
but that's not what tonight's episode is at all.
No. No. Okay.
I kind of mentioned to you before, I'm kind of starting
Uh-huh.
a new sub series of Lore Lords tonight.
Okay.
Which is about one of my favorite things in life, which is
Okay.
history, of course,
Of
and
course.
specifically a little bit of military history, but mostly just people that I think changed our entire planet, specifically major events about that, going into detail about it instead of just a biography. Is going to be a deep dive on a person and things they did in the military side of things, the army side of things. 'Cause
Right.
that's kind of cool.
Right.
I grew up playing Age of Empires. It made me this way.
Me too. Yeah. Yeah.
The history of major events on our little blue dot out in space. And these are probably going to be multi-parters. Almost every single one is probably going to be a multi-parter. But they're gonna. I want to organize it into a YouTube playlist at some point where it's you can just kind of go through
Right.
chronologically just our human history in this way, and how
Right.
it changed the lines of maps and cultures of people, religions, everything. That's just a cool way to
Right.
kind of go over that. I hope people like listening to me talk about my outrageous obsessions. So you might say to yourself, "Hey, Atlas, I've listened to 2 episodes already called Verdun and Somme. That's military history. Hey, there's even a World War One and World War Two summary episode. So what's different this time?" You're not wrong, and not much, to be honest. But what it is different is that it's going to be in chronological order from this point onward. That's the big difference. And it doesn't mean, and I'm not going to be covering everything, of course. It doesn't mean I won't be able to go back to something, But
Sure.
for the most part, it's pretty chronological. And it's also about specific people, figures in history that go further back, and things going from starting in the ancient era. You can even maybe count the Gilgamesh episode, even though it's heavy mythology, as the first part of
Right.
this, because
Yeah,
that's
I guess so.
that's going super far back, and that's this is going to be almost as much legend as that is. It's just the fact that we don't have written records for a lot of things like
Right.
that, that survived. So there's going to be there's a lot to cover. But today's episode, we're focusing on one of my favorite historical figures and another great Chad of history, Alexander the Great.
Ah.
And I wanted to do pre-Rome first, and I figured this is a great place to start. Everyone knows the guy, generally.
We've all heard of him.
You've all heard of him in history class at some point. I'm sure there's plenty of people you could be like, Alexander the Great. Oh, he was an ancient dude. Something like that. Yeah, he's a Chad. He's
I've heard the name at least.
honestly doing this research. He's pretty fucking based. He's not a bad guy, really, from what history writes him as, So, which brings me to my first disclosure. A lot of the stories that we have to talk about you can Google them and find a different telling of it. And I read them all, and I came to this conclusion of the ones that I think are the most accurate, the least biased versions of these stories. The problem is they're so biased to the extreme in these kinds of histories on both sides. If you look at one side, he's like Satan. If you look at the other side, he's like God. Right. So it's impossible to, obviously it's the middle ground. No one's perfect, but I'm going on.
He's the God Emperor. He just lives in a chair now.
He's the closest thing there's probably ever been to one, honestly. So it's Alexander the Great. But yeah, I'm going off of what I think is the most realistic stories of him. Things that aren't way inflated or way exaggerated, basically.
Yes.
Some of
we're not going into the mythology as much as the actual history.
Yeah. People wrote what was supposed to be like a real history about him or a telling of a battle they saw, and then they write it as like this crazy, like, it was 1 versus 1,000,000. Like, no, it wasn't. That didn't happen. That kind of thing. So I tried to find the most realistic numbers and stuff we could. And I'm also going to be going into detail into the detail of like the military tactics that he used, because it is important for going further.
Yeah, that part, as the Age of Empires player, that part excites me too, is military siege tactics and stuff.
There is going to be military. I'm going to go into the details of some battles. And in these episodes, I'll probably do 1 to 2 different battles. Maybe even in the future there'll be a little video counterpart of it that I'll make, because I almost did it for this time but didn't have time. So we'll see. But part 1 of our story today is where he comes from. We're going back to the beginning, as we always do.
Space!
On the planet of Mars. No. He was born in the city of Pella, which was the capital of the kingdom of Macedon. You heard of it? You heard of Macedonia? Yeah.
Heard of it.
If you don't know, because I want to make this clear, it's not Greece. It is north of Greece. It is a territory of people north of Greece in the Slavic Balkan areas today. I guess not really Slavic. Close. Maybe, kind of. You could argue it. Maybe a little bit of both. It is a Balkan.
It's in the Balkans, over in that area. There's a lot of like folding. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like modern day Bulgaria where he was born.
Sure.
So he was born on the 6th day of Hekatombeon, which July, actually.
Oh,
you had the
damn
first
it.
letter right. It's likely July. We actually don't know 100% their calendar conversion, but it's likely July when we get in the year 365 BCE, and he was born Alexander III. His father was King Philip II, who was the current king of Macedon, and his mother was Olympias, who was his 4th wife of 8. But she was the daughter of Neoptolemus the first, the king of Epirus. Epirus is another big power at this time, so that's kind of a big deal that they had a kid. Like, there's 2 major powers having a kid, basically.
That kid must be full of so much potential, right?
Yeah, some great things might happen with him. Yeah. So according to Plutarch, who's an ancient Greek biographer, Olympias had a premonition about her son while she was pregnant, and it said that on the day of consumption of her marriage to the king, she had a dream of her womb getting struck by a thunderbolt, which would light the city on fire, and she watched as the lands surrounding Macedonia were covered in flame. Sometime after they got married, Philip also said that he had a dream where he secured his wife's womb with a seal bearing the image of a lion. I'm not entirely sure what that means. I'm going to be honest.
Well, didn't Alexander the Great have like a boner for lions or something?
The lion was like his symbol, yeah, but I think it's also his Macedon was just a lion symbol. So I don't think it's that crazy. I guess. But I don't know what sealing your wife's womb means. Like duct taping it? Like what is that?
Well, my first thought goes to like the sealing scrolls and the sealing.
Yeah,
things,
no,
like
100%
or a monster. So I'm like
100%. But yeah, I don't know what that means. So breaking that down a little bit, there's actually rumors from people at this time in Macedonia where it's believed people thought she was pregnant before marriage from another man.
Oh, which is probably likely because people have sex and are promiscuous.
Yeah. Or not even another man. It could have been Philip's, but just pre-marriage, which even back in Greece, that was a no-no thing. Like no sex for marriage kind of thing. So like either way, it's a little bit, promiscuous and like, ooh,
Right.
look at that rumor. So people think that it was a dream. This dream that she said was an excuse to claim Zeus was the father of the child. With, oh, I
Okay,
dreamt
yeah.
my womb was struck by a lightning bolt. Oh my gosh, I'm pregnant. That's crazy. That kind of thing.
Zeus is a selfish lover. He just came and left.
Oh, he would. 100%.
Oh,
So
100%. 100%.
that's a Zeus move.
Absolutely.
This also may account for the sealing of the womb dream too, where it means that he was saying he couldn't impregnate her because she was already pregnant.
Oh, maybe.
And then he might be like on board, like he didn't care that she was pregnant or something, or it was his kid, and they're like, oh well, I can't have sex with her because she's pregnant already, and it's Zeus's. So they're kind of like making that as an excuse, maybe, like kind of like a thing.
Look, the common people don't buy any of that shit. Just tell them God
Yeah.
said it's okay.
Yeah. So either way, it seemed like they had a pretty good relationship with each other. Again, she was wife 4 of 8, so he had 8 women with him. So it was, I don't know. I guess they like each other fine. So this was all done before the child was born. So when this story was being talked about, they didn't know what he would become. So it's quite a fun story about potential divine parentage.
Yeah, I love that shit. Let's go.
It's wild that they talk about this before he became what he became. When Alexander was actually born, Dad was away from home. He was sieging a city. And on this day, they actually made a ton of progress in the siege. And it was, the siege was going incredibly well. And he gets a message, hey, your son's born. So
What a victory message after
wow. What a great day. And then he gets a second message from his general Parmenion. He shows up. He's like, guess what? I just defeated both the Paeonian and the Illyrian armies myself and took their nation over from Macedon today.
What a day for him.
And he's like, whoa, that's fucking, my son was born and we just finished a siege. And then a third messenger shows up and he's like, guess what, dude? Your horse just won the Olympics.
What?
Yeah, his horse won in the Olympic race.
That's great.
He's like, whoa, what a divine day. And then they got a fifth messenger.
Wait,
a fourth. There's a fourth. There's a fourth messenger.
Yeah, okay.
A fourth messenger said, hey, just so you know, the Temple of Artemis burned down today.
Oh, that's no good, though. Well, you can't have all the good without the bad.
And they're like, oh, well, obviously because Artemis was helping my son be born, so she wasn't at the temple. Duh.
Oh, yeah.
Big duh. So yeah, that was
what
actually...
What are those called?
What?
Nursing mothers?
Midwife?
Midwife, yeah.
Yeah. This actually was the day the Temple of Artemis and Ephesus burned down. It is dated as the same day Alexander was born.
That's fucking kind of cool, actually.
365 BCE. So that is crazy. Yeah, it's a crazy thing that his birth burned down a temple. I don't know how the fight. I don't know where the flames in the womb came from, but I guess sure.
Sure.
I'm joking. That was a different city. So that was one of the 7, or is one of the 7 wonders of the world, by the way. That's the Temple of Artemis. It burned down on the day he was born. So how much this is true, we actually don't know. This record comes after the events of Alexander's life, so this very well could just be a bullshit thing. But in Olympic records, his horse did win the Olympics that year. So this could have been multiple things that happened in the same year. And they just like in the story to say it happened in the same day because it makes them seem even crazier.
Yeah, that's probably the most likely thing is they just wanted to exaggerate it. That's good storytelling.
It is good storytelling, though. But yeah, he was a very popular king, so it's possibly just made up fanfare that they just tried to like go into that. Yeah. And they tried to show off to other nations like our king's a divine being. Like that kind of thing.
His birth shattered a temple.
Like you said, it's a great story. So
yeah,
that's cool. He was raised by a nurse named Lanike, which is a strange thing because this is actually the sister of one of his future generals and best friends, Cletus the Black.
Cletus? Really?
Cletus the Black.
Oh, Cletus.
It's spelled Cleitus in this way. Cleitus, but I think it is pronounced Cletus. He has his own crazy story about Alexander, which we're not going to get into in this episode, but we will in the future. Okay. He's got his own legends. There's a lot of paintings of it. If you look up Cletus the Black Alexander, you'll see a bunch of paintings of him and Alexander. But yeah,
that's cool.
Outside of that, he'd be raised as a pretty normal Macedonian noble youth. There's one famous story from his childhood that was told a lot, which was when a merchant showed up selling horses to King Philip II. And he showed up and he had all these horses. and he bought a couple, but there was one horse that
Right.
that Philip really liked. But he's like, sorry, this one's like not a good horse. It's too wild. It's crazy. He's like, I'll sell it to you for like cheap. And to make Philip's like, oh no, never mind, I don't want that one. And then Alexander noticed that the horse was afraid of its own shadow, and he pulled the horse aside and tamed it after speaking to it and calming it down and showing it its own shadow and his shadow.
Right.
So the horse was tamed by Alexander, and then Philip, of course, bought it for him and proclaimed, quote, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions, for Macedon is too small for you." End quote.
That's a nice thing to say.
Yeah. So Alexander actually named this horse Bucephalus, which means ox head in Greek, which is a great name for a child's horse.
Yeah, okay.
And this is actually the horse that would end up carrying him all the way to India in his future.
Oh.
The same horse. He had the same horse his whole fucking life. Yeah.
Horses only live like
Horses can live up to like 50. So, I mean, back then, though, that'd be crazy to have a horse live that long. But he wasn't that old when he did his things. If this happened when he was 10, this is a very realistic number. So Alexander was educated in Mieza, which is a boarding school in Macedon for Macedonian nobles. And he was actually taught by none other than a guy you might have heard of named Aristotle.
Oh, cool. Really? Wow.
Yes, he was his teacher. King Philip had him come over from Greece to teach his son.
I was gonna say, for as far as educators go in that time, that's probably as good as you're gonna get.
Yeah, he was hired on the condition that he gets to like run the class the way he wants to run the class. And Philip's like, of course, like you do what you don't do. I'm gonna give you a lot of money and a whole school. And he's like, all right, got it, bet. And he showed up.
Sick. All right, dope.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah, he went through school being taught by Aristotle, which is a big deal, obviously. And he made a lot of lifelong friends in that school. People that would become his future generals. He kept them with his side at all times, and they became known as his companions.
Oh,
that's like the legendary
Aragorn
name.
And his friends.
Yeah. If you've played games like Civilization, you may recognize the word companion being associated with his unique stuff. This is where it comes from. His companions were his friends, his closest friends, who he basically set for life. He's like, you're never leaving my side. Like, you're with me. He was very,
okay.
He was fucking bros before hoes hard. But yeah, he was taught everything from medicine to logic to art under Aristotle. And he loved learning. Alexander fucking loved school. He thought it was the best. He thought it was very important for all his generals to be like as learned as possible. He really thought it was important.
He's very progressive sounding.
He was very progressive. As I told you, he's kind of a base dude. Like he's like, the more I learned about him, I'm like, oh wow, he actually is like, he's kind of like modern the way he acts, like way more than other people of the era and the future ahead of him.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah,
ahead of his time.
He also loved the Iliad. That was his favorite book.
Oh,
he was obsessed with it.
Great. And
he carried it with him at all times, even on campaign in the future. It was said he always had a book of the Iliad, even in battle, like strapped to his belt.
That's dope, actually.
And Aristotle actually gave him an annotated version by Homer that he would famously carry around. So that was like it. Like he had notes from the author in his book.
That's like if like John Mayer personally gave me his first Battle Studies CD signed, and like it was like, here, this is for you. I'd be like, oh my god.
And then
like the original Masters.
And then you went to like the Ukraine and had it like strapped to your back.
Yeah, well, I took down some Ruskies.
Took him down. Some Australian?
No, I meant I'm Australian.
Taking down some Ruskies, I blade
taking
and
down some Ruskies.
So Alexander also learned the ways of the court from his father because he was the king. So, of course, he was around his dad growing up and saw how everything worked in politics. He met many important people during this time, such as Artabazos II of Persia and his daughter Barsine, who was allegedly his future mistress. They met when they were kids in court.
It's always how it starts.
He learned of many other cultures from Egypt all the way to India during this time. How they think, how they work politically, and how they fight. That's an important part. That last one. No, not like that. Like what they do. Like what you know what I mean. Strategies.
Go, yeah.
Part 2. Early signs of greatness. We're out of his childhood. We're into his teenhood. We're gonna start this part off right when he turns 16. ripe age, a young supple Alexander.
Oof.
He finished his school. He's 16. He's ready to be a man. I don't know when you become an adult in this time period, but I'm pretty sure it's before 16.
Yeah, probably.
He had the opportunity to show what he learned when his father, King Philip II, would wage war against the nation of Thrace to the north, leaving him as king regent in his place. So dad goes away to campaign. He's like, hey, kid, you're the king while I'm gone. You're the regent, so take care of things. So, however, when Philip was gone, Philip was known as a pretty great soldier, for the record. Like, people were like, he's a good military commander. Like, he knows what he's doing. So when he left, the Thracian tribe of Mede that was under control of Macedonia rose up against Macedonia, thinking now would be their time to take back their land for themselves while Philip was gone.
Probably not a good move there, pal. You don't know who's sitting on the throne.
Yeah, no one did at this point. No one knew who this guy was. So Alexander III was able to take his first military action during this event. He raised an army and would move to the territory very quickly and just crush them. First battle, we don't know much details about it, but apparently one day is how long this revolt lasted. And when he took out their army and their capital city and renamed it Alexandropolis.
I could do better than that. It's okay, I guess.
He loves attaching his name to things, which I think is a pretty hilarious thing to do. It'd be like me taking a city and being like, yeah, this is Christown now. Fuck you. You're always going to see it now. You're always going to see my name now.
Christown, baby.
It's a big fuck you to them. So during this time, when this battle was happening and Philip was away, the nearby city of Amphissa of Greece began to work the lands near Delphi, which these were sacred lands under the god Apollo, which were never meant to be touched. You were not allowed in the god. The god said you couldn't touch this land, right?
Yeah, classic.
You know, you probably have heard of the Oracle of Delphi, whatever you want to say. It's a very important thing in Greek religion, this area. So this actually gave Philip II a casus belli, which means, a legal reason to go to war against Greece. Because now he was able to go in there because you guys are being, heretical. I'm going to go fight you guys. And he took the opportunity.
Yeah.
This was his chance to intervene in Greek affairs and kind of take some of this land. So he was busy campaigning against the Thracians to the north. So he made Alexander in charge of mustering an army for his own campaign in southern Greece. Alexander would immediately show his tactical genius as he was worried the other city-states of Greece may intervene, and he said, well, what if we baited them to attack us first? So they officially declared war, and then he began to prepare a military against the city-state of Illyria, but it was all fake. He just made a bunch of troop movements in an area so that their scouts would say, oh, Alexander's coming to attack us. And then he basically set his army up as a trap, which worked. The Illyrian nation attacked Macedonia, and they tried to initiate a preemptive strike in this war, and when they showed up, the army wasn't there, and sure enough, Alexander and his elite companions were directly behind them.
Oh, get fucked.
And the army basically was entirely destroyed. So that was Illyria's whole army too, and they all died in that fight.
Wow.
So
no survivors type thing, no mercy?
I think there may have been a couple, handful, but not enough to be an army. You know what I mean? The army was gone.
Right.
So by the year of 338 BCE, Philip finished securing Thrace and returned to Alexander to join his army in the campaign against the Greeks. And they were able to march through Thermopylae after a successful battle against the Theban garrison forces. Now, if you remember, it's the word you've probably heard of Thebes before.
Yes.
Huge Greek power at this time, massive military powerhouse, very scary. But they were able to beat a garrison force. Not a whole army, just a small garrison force, which allowed them to occupy the city of Eladia, which was only a few days' march from both Thebes and Athens. So this was a very terrifying spot for the Greeks to be in, because they never really saw Macedonia as a threat before. And the Athenian leader named Demosthenes would ally with Thebes, making an official alliance against Macedonia, despite Philip's best attempts to try to get Athens on their side. He really wanted Athens to just team up with them, but they wouldn't listen because the Macedonians weren't proper Greeks, So they were like, we don't trust you.
Yeah.
So Philip retaliated by marching on Amphissa, the city that they worked the land of Apollo, to defeat, and he defeated their mercenary armies, which led the city to surrender. So he did what he went there to do. He basically had the city under his control, and he sent a peace offering to Athens and Thebes, saying, like, I'm done here. Let's end this. And even despite another win under the belt of Macedonia, they rejected the peace offer. It's like playing Civ or like Total War, and they just won't accept a peace offer even though you're dominating them. It's like basically what's happening.
You're like offering them stuff too. You're like, take some money. Like, I don't care. And they're still like, no.
I don't think he offered them anything in this case, but he did just want to leave. He's like, I'll go back to Macedonia. They're like, no, you're mean. You're a bully. We're going to kill you.
It's just like, I literally don't want to be a bully anymore. I want to go.
Yeah. So they tried their best, but they had to go to war, I guess. So Philip ended up marching south, and he would meet his opponents in an area known as Charonia in Boeotia, which is a region in Greece, where we would get we're going to go into our first deep dive of a battle, which is the Battle of Charonia. Probably should have picked what I knew how to say, but I didn't. Part 3, the Battle of Charonia. So, King Philip II would march side by side with his son, Alexander III, south into Greece, and they would be facing two opponents in this battle, Athens and Thebes. Both powerful nations of their own right. Scary enough, but allied together, this is going to be a huge deal. This is a huge challenge for them to overcome. If you were a betting man, you would not bet on Macedonia in this conflict back then. You'd be like, there's no fucking chance. Like, Athens and Thebes are fucking like world champions style militaries at this time. Macedonians are these barbarians to the north, basically. So the details of this camp leading up to this campaign are almost completely unknown. But it's thought that he chose not to enter the area of Boeotia by the mountains due to the fact that Spartans had recently battled and lost there, which he knew about it. And he's like, okay, so this is a dangerous area to try to like fight on, so we're not going to go around to Athens. Instead, we're going to go right down the middle, which is unfortunate because that's where they're going to be able to fight the best, but we don't really have a choice. And this would be the first battle that Alexander would show his mastery of combat and tactics. According to the historian Diodorus, the Macedonian army at this point numbered 30,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. Philip was leading the right wing of the army, placing his son Alexander, who was 18 at the time, in command of the left wing, accompanied by his soon-to-be-famous generals, the Companions. The Greeks showed up in force, but unfortunately, we have either no record or fake numbers about fake records about their numbers, but the troops come from the area of Achaia, Corinth, Chalcis, Epidaurus, Megara, Troezen. Those are the city-states that decided to lend their armies to them. The majority of the troops, however, were flanking them with Athens and Thebes on the left and the right wings. Their numbers are not to be were not recorded properly, but it is said by all historians that the Greek forces were far superior in number to the Macedonian army. But modern historians believe it was most likely just slightly larger, not like massively. Definitely bigger, because all those nations had their own armies in that conflict. So they had a lot of soldiers, but it wasn't like... Modern historians believe it wasn't like 100 to 1. It was more probably like 32,000 versus like 35,000. And so the Greek army held the position defensively on the road, obviously. They were in a defensive war. The left wing, like I mentioned before, was the Athenian troops, and the right was the Thebians. And they recruited troops from all the allied city-states that we mentioned were in the middle. They stood with the left flank on the foothills of a mountain called Mount Thurion, which blocked the side road, which made it unable for the Macedonians to get around them. And the other flank was on the Kephisos River, which meant the Macedonians also couldn't get around that side. So they basically forced a head-on battle. Also, the Greek line was 2.5 miles in length.
Jesus Christ.
That's a really long line.
Uh-huh.
And it was slanted slightly northeastwards as to not allow the Macedonians to do a full-on flat engagement. So there was if they attacked one spot, the line could adjust to bend around it. That was a pretty common Greek tactic at the time. They didn't line straight. They lined up diagonally.
Yeah, okay.
So this was dire for the Macedonian forces. Philip saw this army. He's like, God, these guys are a lot of them, and they're in like a great like military. They have the advantage. They're the defensive force. Like, we have to attack. They're not going to attack us. Like, so we have to be the aggressors. He was unable to focus in the right wing like he wanted to. It was his normal tactic, because the left wing, due to the diagonal shape, would be able to swing in and attack him. And the left wing, if he wanted to attack them, was on the high ground. So a focus attack there would be almost fatal. And since the Greeks had defensive superiority, he definitely could not attack the high ground. So full details in this battle, not very clear. They're very scarce, but we do have some recounts from some historians and survivors who passed on the information. And I've reconstructed an account from multiple people, including Polyaenus, who was a Greek author who has other reliable sources from other battles, and some sources from other battles that are just wrong. So it's pretty iffy. And it is unfortunate. Yeah, he was a Polyaenus. They would draw out. They would
anus for many.
Yeah, anus for all. So he recounts the story as the battle as this way. So Philip would personally lead an offensive attack with his troops on the left side into the right side of the enemy. So the side not on the high ground. And they attacked. The Greeks moved forward to counter him a small amount, and then he retreated. Philip would retreat quite a ways, feigning defeat, and then stop at an area of higher ground where the Athenian troops attacked, and then he would turn around and full attack in force, now having the high ground. So
I'd be like, wait a minute, what?
So modern historians look at this and believe what this was, because it was used by Alexander in the future, was a tactic Alexander came up with, which was the wheel maneuver, where the whole Macedonian line became a wheel. So when Philip retreated, the right wing was able to withdraw and pivot the entire line around its center. So you can imagine it moving like a wheel, which at the same time allows the Macedonian left wing to attack the Theban forces and basically punch a hole in their side. Which that was Alexander and his companions, who are pretty fucking good at killing people. So this whole time, the Athenians would chase Philip, who then stopped and fought him, were now getting tired. These Athenian troops were just levied citizens. They were not trained military professionals. That's what a hoplite is, if you ever hear that term.
Right.
That is a levied soldier, not a trained man-at-arms like in the medieval ages. This is a soldier who just, is a farmer. So these Athenian troops would continue to fight Philip, and eventually they would be fully routed by Philip's forces because they were inexperienced and tired after running so much in the field. So Alexander was then left to clean up the remaining troops, charging in from the opposite side with his cavalry, basically stomping everyone in his path. The Athenians were probably the most elite force of this battle, obviously outside of the Macedonians. So when they died, the morale of the rest of the Greek forces dropped drastically, and they probably just started to flee. Especially the city-state recruits in the center, they probably just ditched.
Just like a game of Total War. After the big guys go down, it's like, oh, fuck this.
Yeah. So that was basically the end of the battle. Alexander just was swooped in and killed everyone with him and his cavalry. And another important note is that the right wing of the allied forces with Thebians that Alexander attacked consisted of a group known as the Sacred Band. These were an elite group of 300 men who were feared as far as Persia. These are like the Thebians, legendary warriors. All 300 were killed under Alexander's attack by his phalanx. Not a single one survived. And a monument actually would be erected there 100 years later by the Romans, erected a monument there regarding the stories of the elite Sacred Band and their legendary exploits in history, because they beat the Spartans, they beat the Persians, they were an undefeated group of military soldiers.
And then the Macedonians just kind of...
Yep, Alexander's fuck you, and just killed them. So
oh my God,
that happened. And so this is actually backed up, too, with evidence, because the monument that the Romans built, underneath it, 254 Theban armored bodies were found. So this is likely the gravesite of the actual Sacred Band. They actually probably did die in this battle and were buried here.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So total losses were 1,000 Athenian soldiers, with 2,000 taken prisoner, and basically identical numbers to the Thebans. This is known to be one of the most decisive battles of the entire ancient world, due to Macedonians wiping out nearly an entire army of Greece in one battle. After this, no one could stop Philip in Greece, and the rest of Greece began to panic in attempts to rebuild their walls in cities such as Athens or Corinth in an effort to prevent a future siege. Fortunately for the Greeks, though, Philip didn't want to kill them. Like before, when he sent a peace offer, he's like, stop. Just stop. I'm a diplomat over a warrior. Here's my word, and I want you guys to be on my side. I don't want you to die. I don't want to burn your cities down. Just be like my city-states. Fight for me when I call you.
Yeah.
And they were like, all right, sure, we're in. So basically, Greeks joined up with Macedonia in a future effort to take on Persia.
Oh, big boys! That's a big battle. That's a
big task to take on Persia. Persia was the most powerful force in the world at this time. If you don't know, in the ancient time, Persia it was the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Achaemenid Persian Empire, I believe is how you say it. They were massive. So Philip knew the Greeks would be much better as allies than a puppet. So instead of even puppeting them, he gave them autonomy, but they had to legally work for him when he asked.
Yeah.
His first destination was to go to Thebes, and he treated them extremely harshly. We don't actually know why. They likely insulted him in some way, because he removed all their leaders. He had them all killed, and he instilled their leaders with pro-Macedonian politicians.
Hey, that's what America did in the Middle East a lot.
Yeah.
That always worked out.
Yeah, it worked out great. We'll see how that goes in the future. So he also made them pay extremely heavy fines for their prisoners. So he made them pay to get all their prisoners back from the battle. They had to give a ton of money to Macedonia. He would then hit up Athens and literally just gave them their soldiers for free, didn't make them pay for anything, didn't take care of leaders, and said, you guys are chill. Athens, we're bros. Likely.
I heard about that with Athens, though. Like of all the different Greek cities and stuff, they were the more progressive, liberal type.
Very progressive, diplomatic city as opposed to a warlike city. So the reason he likely didn't have any issues with them and wanted to be super nice to them is he wanted their navy because they had the biggest navy maybe in the world. If not if the Persians probably had more ships, but they weren't as good as the Athenian navy.
Yeah.
So he likely wanted their navy to be his navy for when he campaigns into Persia. The other states that took part in the battle, like all the ones I mentioned before, they quickly just joined up. They were like, we're in. Don't even worry about it. The only people that weren't involved in Greece now under Philip's rule, who he now had to deal with, was the last Greek state of Sparta.
Huh.
So he would approach the Spartans, but they refused his offers of alliance, likely because they wanted to take an advantage of a now weakened neighbor, the Greeks. They're probably like, when you leave, we're just going to take Greece. That's probably what they were thinking.
Yeah.
So Philip just attacked him. He just surprise warred them and attacked at the nation of Lacedaemon, which is like the northern area of Sparta, and just burned the whole nation to the ground.
Fuck, Jesus.
Sparta was like, okay, fuck, dude. And they just made peace immediately and basically allowed them to build forts in Sparta.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, I kind of get it, though. Sparta's whole reputation, even to this day, is like some of the most brutal, hardened, stubborn people in that area.
Yeah.
So he punch him really hard in the fucking face and tell him to submit.
Exactly. Like, if we're going to send a message, we have to hit him hard. Like, that's the only way they listen is violence. So let's fucking hit him hard.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. It sucks, but that's what you get when you're too stubborn, I guess.
So Sparta wasn't like the other nations where they were like, we'll fight for you, but they basically like, we're not going to attack you. And also to guarantee that, they allowed Macedonia to build garrisons in their land. So there was Macedonian garrisons in the island, in the areas of Sparta.
That sounds all about right to me. It sounds about right.
By mid-337 BCE, Philip returned to Corinth to Athens and established the League of Corinth, which was basically like a League of Nations for Greece, where all states minus Sparta would be under his control as like one kind of overall nation. That's a big popular thing. If you read a lot of Greek history, you might have recognized the word league. There's like the Athenian League, the Second Athenian League, the Third Athenian League. It's kind of like how they maintained their status as city-states, but kind of also being just one unified Greece for different periods of time. So when he controlled all this, and he had the League of Corinth under his command, he said, all right, Greece, declare war on Persia. And they're like, yes, sir. So they'd sent a war declaration to Persia. And what they did was they made Philip the war leader. So Philip was in charge of the all Greek military at this point, legally. And Philip was now getting ready for his campaign in Persia, and he ended up... But first, he would have to return home to Pella, which is where we get to our next chapter. which is part 4, The Exile and Rise of Alexander. Because remember, we're not talking about Philip. We haven't talked about Alexander for a minute.
I mean,
Philip's
just a little bit
dad.
here and there when he was in charge of fights and stuff.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Philip's his dad. So that's why he, and Alexander's 18 at this point. So they get home, they come to court. We're back home, let's rest. But soon it wasn't all well for the hero of our story, because King Philip II returned and fell in love with a woman named Cleopatra Eurydice in 338 BCE. This is not the Cleopatra. Cleopatra is a very common name in Greece at this time for obvious reasons. So Cleopatra was the niece of one of his closest generals, Attalus, I say it, his close general Attalus. And they may not seem like a huge deal. This may not seem like a problem, but in the world of old European style kingdoms, this is the same as like feudal medieval age, like style politics. Rome stopped it. But it came back. This is the same thing with families and succession rights and kingdoms, right? Like they even use the word king, for example. Like it's the same shit. So we're keeping that in mind. This was a huge deal because this would make Alexander have a less secure position, as Cleopatra was a purebred Macedonian, where Alexander is only half. Therefore, if a son between Philip and Cleopatra is born, it would be a pure-blooded son who would have claim to the throne.
Here we go with the politics and drama.
So now we're getting into the Game of Thrones style politics stuff, where we actually have a story from Plutarch describing an event by witnesses at the wedding. So this is what it says. Quote, "At the wedding of Cleopatra, whom Philip fell in love with and married, she being much too young for him, her uncle Attalus, in his drink, desired the Macedonians would implore the gods to give them a lawful successor to his kingdom by his niece. This so infuriated Alexander that he stood up and threw a cup, hitting him in his head, and citing, 'You villain,' said he, 'what am I, then, a bastard?' Philip, then, taking Attalus' part, rose up and would have run his son through, but by good fortune for them both, either his over-hasty rage or the wine he had drunk made his foot slip, so that he fell down on the floor. At which Alexander reproachfully insulted over him. 'See there,' said he, 'the man who makes preparations to pass out of Europe into Asia, overturned in passing from one seat to another.'"
Yeah, suck it. What does that mean? Break that down.
He was saying this guy, he's making preparations to take out over Europe and Asia, couldn't even get up from one seat to his next chair because he was too drunk. He stood up and fell over. So that was Alexander taking a shot at his dad. So basically, Alexander picked up a cup and threw it at Philip's favorite general's head and fucking domed him. And then Philip got mad and tried to kill his son, probably because he was drunk with a spear, assumingly. He had to run him through, or a sword maybe. Right. But he fucking tripped and fell on his face.
To jump to that conclusion, though, there must have been a lot of friction between daddy and son for a while. If he's going to immediately jump to fuck it, I'm going to stab him. I don't care how drunk you are.
Yeah.
You don't usually go
This
there.
That's a point that I was going to bring up later, because I don't know what their relationship was like, because that's exactly what I was thinking too when I read this, but it's going to seem like the opposite in a minute. So I don't know if he was maybe he was in a drunken rage. He's like, I'm going to swing my sword at him, not realizing that he could fucking kill his son. You know what I mean?
Right. I'll just I got to make a scene for the people.
Exactly. I got to have my generals' backs, or else my general will fight against me. That kind of thing.
My genitals.
My genitals. the spawn of my genitals.
Oh, God.
So, obviously, talking out like this and insulting his dad, the king, in front of everyone, made his life in Macedonia very dangerous for young Alexander. He was 19 at this point. And in 337,
probably a little cocky.
Yeah, a little cocky, but he had respect and he had his companions. So,
that's true.
In 337 BCE, he would flee Macedonia alongside his mother, who he believed also was in danger. His mother Olympias, because again, she wasn't Macedonian, and that was his son. So maybe as retaliation, he would kill his mom. You know what I mean? Who knows? So he's like, I don't blame him for this. I do not blame Alexander for this at all. Smart. We know how Middle Ages how this drama bullshit family stuff works. Yeah. So Alexander, good call. Get out of there.
Yeah.
He first stopped at the nation of Dodona, meeting with King Alexander I of Epirus, which was his uncle, which you remember Epirus is where his other half of his family is. So he dropped off his mother in Epirus with her brother to keep her safe.
Yeah, much better.
Alexander, fearing for his and his mother's safety, decided that splitting up would be the best course. So he decided to leave her there, and he ended up going to Illyria for refuge with one of the kings there, which he recently, if you remember, defeated in battle. He goaded them into attacking him and dominated them.
Right.
And he went to them, which I guess this is kind of how Greek honor worked, because they respected him as a warrior, so they accepted him as a guest to their nation. They're like, you dominated us, so you're chill here. Like, you are better, kind of. It was like how they treated him. So he stayed in Illyria for 6 months. Before long, he would receive word from his friend Demaratus back in Macedonia, who worked as a mediator between Alexander and his father Philip II, who claims Philip never intended to disown his son, never intended to harm his son, as he was far too trained politically and militarily to ever be like disposed of. Like he's like you're way too valuable to your dad, and you ran off prematurely, so you need to come back home. We don't know yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's good. I mean,
Yeah,
like, hey, man,
that's good.
You're
That's
good
good.
with your dad.
Yeah. So we don't know what exactly convinced him otherwise, but he did get convinced to come back home, and he did return to Macedonia. He didn't fully trust his dad, though. He was never fully on board with Philip after this, and knowing how politics work, again, I don't blame him.
I don't blame him either.
Yeah. He received word shortly after returning that a Persian satrap who was visiting, with satrap means like governor, named Pixodaris from the region of Caria, which is in Anatolia, aka Turkey, offered his eldest daughter to Alexander's half-brother, Philip Arrhidaeus. So Alexander's friends told him that this was proof Alexander's trying to make your brother the king, who's more Macedonian than you are. And he's like, I don't believe you. So his mom, Olympias, told him the same thing. Like, this is a trap. Like, you need to get out of here or take care of this because he's disposing you.
Right.
So he would then send a famed actor, Thessalis of Corinth, to Pixodaris in Persia to tell him that instead of offering his daughter to Alexander, or instead of offering his daughter to Philip Arrhidaeus, his brother, he should offer it to Alexander and not a pretender heir.
Ooh.
Which is just funny to me because he basically sent Matt Damon to go talk to a. He sent. He was a Thessalis of Corinth. He was like the star actor at the time. Like he sent him.
We sent
as an
that
envoy.
basketball player to talk to Kim Jong Un.
Yeah,
you know? It's
exactly. It's pretty much what happened.
Yeah.
So Philip found out about this, though, of course, and stopped all negotiations with Pixodaris, called everything off. He had Corinth bring Thessalis, the actor, to him in chains. We don't really know what happened after that. We don't know if that's... I don't think he killed him, but he could have. He also exiled Herpalus, Nearchus, Ptolemy, and Eragrius, who are four companions. He exiled them from Macedonia for convincing Alexander that this was a threat. And then he apparently scolded Alexander publicly, maybe slapped him around a bit, and told him this was because he wanted a lesser governor's daughter to marry your brother, so you would have grounds for a more powerful wife in the future.
Oh, what an idiot!
So Alexander wasn't thinking politically enough about the situation, basically. Like, this was a step because it's like, oh, well, my weaker son is married to a governor's daughter, so I need to have my more powerful son married to a queen. That's kind of like what Philip was thinking.
Right.
So, politics is hard. But again, that's what I mean. Philip was like, listen, you idiot. Like, I'm not trying to kill you. Like, so that's like, it's a confusing relationship between them. So,
yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So it's hard to read what their life was like with each other. So the next year in 336 BCE, one of his brothers was getting married, and they went to the wedding in an area known as the AJ, which is the modern city of Virginia. So it was with an E and an R, Virginia. That's a modern city.
That's how I say it when I'm streaming.
That's what Google says it's pronounced as. I said Virginia. It's not, apparently. It's Virginia. This is the modern city of Virginia. This is the Greek. It's in Greece today. It's on the handle of Greece.
Yeah. Greek's vagina.
Yeah, but back then it was called the Ajay, is what it was called. Kind of like a gay. It went from a gay to, to vagina.
I was just thinking of a JJ.
a J. So yeah, you know, a bit weird. So anyway, this was the wedding. This was a wedding of Cleopatra of Macedon to Olympius's brother Alexander the First.
Okay.
So Alexander the First Epirus, the guy who he's not the Alexander the Third. That's Alexander the Third is our boy. Remember, he dropped his mom off with Alexander the First. He was marrying Cleopatra of Macedon. So that general's, like, you know, niece, I think it was. It was the niece of General Attalus, I believe. Was marrying his uncle. During the wedding, King Philip II of Macedon was assassinated.
Oh, shit. I wasn't expecting it. You said that so, like, at the wedding, they all got drunk and partied. It's like, nope. He'd go, okay.
Well, during the drinking and partying, the captain of his personal guard, Pausanias, would assassinate King Philip II. And there's many theories as to why Pausanias killed Philip. One is that he was being paid by Olympius or even Alexander to kill him because, you know, they just didn't trust him anymore. But there's a more popular story, which is that Philip, General Attalus, this guy we've talked multiple times about, General Attalus, what do you want to say?
Yeah.
Big, powerful general, raped Pausanias.
Oh.
And Philip was told about this, like, hey, your general, I'm your leader of your guard. Your general got drunk and raped me. And Philip did nothing about it.
Oh.
So I read the whole story about the rape incident. It is documented. So, no. I also just want to clarify, Pausanias is a man. They were both men. A man raped a man.
Right.
And so looking at this story, it gets really confusing because it seems like it happened in revenge. Attalus basically revenge raped Pausanias for hitting on a girl that he liked who was also named Pausanias. So the story is very confusing to read. Like, it is actually kind of hurt your brain. Like, I don't know what's going on. Someone made a mistake somewhere in history in, like, writing this down. Like, someone had to have made a mistake. Like, there's no way she also had the same name because it's so weird that it happened.
Right.
Like, or is there some woman named, or maybe it was even a man. I couldn't tell. It could have been another man named Pausanias.
There was
maybe
a lot
male
of
name.
Hey, look, ancient Greece. There was a lot of gay sex going on. So
no one cared. No one cared about sexuality. You could be as gay as you wanted in Greece. Basically, the bottom line was, if you were a noble or a king or whatever, you could have men in your life. You couldn't get married to them, but could. There was an equivalent. I don't remember what it was called. It was called like life ship or something, which is like a male or female version of marriage. But as long as you had a kid, no one cared. That was the bottom line. So you had a kid, get a kid made, and then you could have as many boys as you want as a guy. You know.
Yeah.
Go party with the boys. Anyway, Philip died. He got murdered. It was an assassination. Anyway. After that took place, Pausanias fled the scene but tripped over a vine and was killed by Alexander's companions.
Rough.
After everyone was able to convene immediately after, Alexander was crowned king of Macedon by the noble class and the military class together at the age of 20, and he had inherited one of the most powerful militaries in the world. Keep in mind, as we said before, pre- and post-Roman politics was a family-based and like rival thing to the issue to the throne, right? And there was plenty of threats to Alexander's throne. So he was now the king of Macedon, and his first thing was to consolidate his power, which was probably wise. And what he did was to make sure he had no pretenders around. So his own cousin, Ammianus IV, was called to come party, and actually what that meant was have your head cut off, because he was the closest person to have a claim to the throne. So Alexander basically called him in and had him killed.
Hey, pal, you got to come in.
Yeah, hey, can we talk about something? Decapitated. Alexander's mother, Olympias, had Cleopatra, the daughter of that guy we were talking, Cleopatra, the daughter of General Attalus, who we talked about before, and her daughter, Europa, were brought in and which was a daughter from Philip and Cleopatra, and she was worried she could be given the right of queen, especially by Attalus. So she had them both burned alive.
Oh my god. Okay.
Alexander did not want this to happen. Basically was furious. Apparently almost killed his mom because she did this. Because he wanted Attalus at his side. So after this point, he didn't exile his mom, but he refused to communicate with her basically from this point on. He's like, I'm done with you.
Yeah, that's a pretty fucked up thing to do.
She also convinced him that the whole marriage thing before was to go against him when it wasn't. So I feel like she was a pretty toxic person. So,
She probably didn't like Philip. She probably had her own agenda with him.
He cut the toxicity out of that. So what he had to do was he had to find Attalus, the guy he domed with a cup earlier. He captured him and killed him. So that just because he was convinced that again, that's a wise move. He probably would have fought him because he killed
his wife and your kid. Yeah, he's gonna come and get you.
So he consolidated his power after this. He had everything was done. His mom went crazy, killed a bunch of women that he didn't want killed, including his fucking sister, which is fucked up.
That's super fucked up.
Alexander did not want that to happen. So anyway, he had his power consolidated. He was done with that stuff. So now
it feels like people literally did it for him, even though he was like, "Hey, don't, don't do this."
So he probably wanted Attalus at his side, even though he did hit him with a cup in the head. Like, he was one of the most famous generals at the time. He wanted him to be his army guy. Yeah, 100%.
You can get mad at somebody and throw a cup at somebody as opposed to murder their wife and kid.
Yeah, behind your son's back, whose kid is your sister. Is his sister. Again. So,
right.
She literally burned her son's little sister, which is just, okay, whatever, dude. Fucking crazy.
No, it's...
Anyway, Olympias is toxic. We're not going to talk about her again. I think she died in her own, alone, cold and sad, probably, because he didn't let anyone talk to her again. Yeah, so... At first, when I was reading the story, I was like, oh, his mom's kind of got his back. I'm like, never mind. She's a crazy person. She's toxic. And so, news spread from Greece that this was happened. And the Greek states are like, well, Philip's gone? Easy. Let's kill Macedon now, because there's no strong leader there anymore. So, Greece revolted. Thebes, Athens, Thessaly, and the Thracian tribes all declared war on Macedon.
Well...
Alexander's aides said, "Hey, you gotta lead like Philip. Send some guys back into Greece with peace talks to make sure that get them on your side. Get them on your side. Let's be friends with them." So Alexander calmly listened, took note of that. Gathered 3,000 companion cavalries and rode south into Greece. He arrived in Greece. The Thessalian troops had set up camp, occupying the roads between Mount Olympus and Mount Ossa, which would prevent you from entering Greece on horseback from Macedonia, right? So what they did was he decided overnight he was going to have his entire army of 3,000 cavalry scale Mount Ossa on horseback, and they did it. And the next morning, there was a massive force of Macedonian cavalry at the rear of the entire Thessalian army, who immediately surrendered. And not only did they surrender to Alexander, they joined up, and their army was tacked on to Alexander's current army of 3,000, adding about another 2,000 men to the army.
Hey, you know what? Just let's go. I like your vibe, bro.
Yeah, basically. And Alexander, so no blood was spilled, and Alexander's like, sign the peace treaty, join me. And they're like, all right. So they did. They were in. Alexander next arrived at Thermopylae, where he was immediately recognized as the rightful leader. And the league established by Philip II was basically agreed. They're like, let's just, you know what? You had an army here really fucking fast before we could even raise an army. Like, let's just be friends again. You're better than we thought. So Corinth and Athens sued for peace, and it went all back into his fold, where he once again was in charge. But there's actually a couple cool story. There's a couple of things that happened here, and there's a cool story of him when he visits Corinth. This is actually talked about in a lot of historical plays and stuff as this interaction. where Alexander arrives in Corinth and he met the famed philosopher known as Diogenes the Cynic. Alexander, being a big fan of philosophers, the whole Aristotle thing, and he was a big fan of philosophy in general, sought him out and basically met with Diogenes. And when they met, he asked him if there was anything I could do for him. He said, I like your stuff. What can I do for you? And Diogenes responded with, move a little bit to the left. You're blocking my sunlight. Alexander also famously replied with, but verily, if I were not Alexander, I would like to be Diogenes. Apparently thinking that was a very funny response.
So he had a good sense of humor about
that's
it.
the reason I like him. He seems pretty based on that level. He was just like, he was like, yeah, you're dope, dude. Let's fucking be bros.
All right, cool, man. I mean, look, I bet having a sense of humor back then was probably pretty tough to find.
Yeah. So we don't actually, so this story is like, that's a famous story. There's a couple different famous plays and stuff from back then, especially about that were done a lot, and like Rome really loved doing the Alexander story. That was one of their favorite things. So they did this a lot, and this is a famous scene from a lot of those stories. It's him meeting Diogenes the Cynic. So after that happened, he actually would be crowned hegemon, which means leader, during his time in Corinth, which essentially makes him the king of all Greece, minus Sparta. So unfortunately, his next bit of news was much less amusing, as he received word that the Thracian tribes of the north had once again unified against Macedonia and declared war on them. Greece was currently at war with Persia, if you remember, and now he got another war from Thrace, which is the nation like right above on the northern border of Macedonia. So he knew he was in charge of Persia. He had to take care of this, but first he has to go home to secure his borders, and he would do so. Surprising his peers and fellow leaders with extreme ease, as he would enter the lands north of Macedonia with his cavalry and crush the revolting Thracians, which his father fought really hard against. He just rode through them like nothing. And his forces at this point had become known as masters of war, and his tactical genius in the field was seemingly unable to be met. He would even engage Thracian forces in skirmish to test their mettle, and then find out afterwards that in that skirmish, he wiped out their entire army.
Oh, yikes.
So he was like, oh, you guys suck, basically. This is what happened. So he basically, word was spread about Alexander, and apparently Athens and Thebes, like, he was in Thrace. So what does Athens and Thebes do? They rise up and declare war on Macedonia. Alexander, at this point, is just trying to campaign against Persia, and Greece just won't stop declaring war on him.
Well, yeah. They have a lot of grudges, I suppose.
A lot of grudge and a lot of pride and a lot of ancient history. And Alexander had enough of this shit, basically. So he goes down, he kills all the Thracians, puts new leaders in charge, goes back down to Athens, way faster again than Athens expected. So another thing I want to bring up at this point is, which is possible, we don't know this for sure, the idea of a standing army did not exist during this point.
Right.
So when you raised an army for war, you sent dudes out to all your nearby towns and said, bring me your soldiers. And the soldiers would come and they'd be lightly trained if they weren't trained already, and you'd have a force. It's very likely that the companions and the companion cavalry were a trained professional army, maybe even the first in history. Which is why he was able to move so quickly. He already had 3,000 dudes ready to fight at all times. So there was no period of mustering. He shows up in Athens while they're still mustering an army, and he's just there with a force. Other city-states bowed to Alexander, basically like, we can't fight you, like, you're going way too fast. So seeing what he had just done in Thebes still believed they could fight him, and they held their ground in the city itself. So there was a siege that took place. However, the resistance was ineffective at best, and Alexander had enough of Thebes' shit over all these years, so he burned the entire city to the ground. So this once legendary Greek powerhouse was now a pile of ash and rubble on the floor. And this sent a huge message to the rest of Greece, and this would be the last time they would ever fight against Alexander, and Athens surrendered and guaranteed to be beneath Alexander to save their skin, which put Greece in a state of peace. Honestly, for the first time in like hundreds of years, Greece people stopped fighting against each other. So now for the next part of the episode, we're going into the Persian campaign. We're not going too deep into it because this is the majority. This is what the next part will be. We're going to start talking about what happens and set it up a little bit, because this is basically what Alexander is most known for, is his efforts in Persia. If you remember what we said earlier, Philip II already laid the groundwork for an offensive war into Persia by making the Greek city-states declare war on them. And this never stopped. Even Attalus, the dead guy who, all that shit happened with, he had even fought in Persian territory, in between these times with an army.
What was the big reason to go to war with Persia anyway, to be honest?
That's literally what the next sentence is. Okay. So the reason they wanted to go to war with Persia was because Persia had control of like all the islands in between Greece and modern day Turkey. Those were ancient Greek cities that Persia had taken over around the year 480 BCE. So the Persian Empire was large and very powerful, and they controlled these cities, but these were Greek cities with Greek people and Persian governors. So a lot of the Greek nations, like, it's our right, how they always did in the medieval ages, thought they just had the right to claim territory. So, it's our right to get these lands back, so we have to fight for it. And at the time, the Persian Empire was the most powerful military in the world, and people thought the Greeks never would stand a chance in an offensive war against them. That being said, the war Macedonia had started in this last year or so had actually been going well, because it didn't take a lot to convince a Greek city-state to rise up against their Persian governor when you have a Greek army backing them up. So basically they just rose up in revolt, and then the Macedonian and Greek forces moved in and secured it. So also keep in mind, these are islands. For Persia to retaliate, they have to get ships back over there. Mm-hmm. So it's not easy for Persia to just show up there. Navies move very, very slow in the ancient era, in the classical era. So that was a big effort to get there. So they were able to claim a couple islands back. But when Philip was dead, the demoralized Macedonian troops and Greek troops there actually either lost their fighting, like they either stopped, fighting period, surrendered, or just abandoned the fight period. After hearing, his 20-year-old sons are a king now, whatever. So they basically stopped trying to fight in the islands. And Alexander heard this. He's like, we lost some of our lands. But Alexander had no intention of backing down and fully wanted to continue his father's legacy. And if we know anything about following him at this time, it's that he's better than his dad at fighting. And in 334 BCE, Alexander led his force of 6,100 cavalry, 48,100 soldiers, 120 ships with a crew of 38,000 trained naval experts across the Dardanelles, and landed in Asia Minor, which is Turkish soil now, which basically just caught the Persians by surprise. They were like, the fuck is this guy doing? Like, you can't fight us. Like, what are you doing? And it is said that Alexander himself was the first person to step off, demanding that he would be the first one in the army to touch Persian soil. And he steps off, throws his spear into the soil, and proclaims, "I accept Asia as a gift from the gods."
Goddamn fucking...
He's such a Chad. Right, it's unbelievable. So he's just that's kind of why I love his, it's like Gilgamesh. Like, he has such Chad energy and such an asshole. Like, it's just hilarious to me. So the Persians, he also keep in mind he's 20. Like, it adds up. That adds up for a 20-year-old dude. The Persians knew Macedonia as a diplomatic state under the rule of Philip II, so they never thought much about them attacking, and they were kind of like, okay, well, even if we lose a few islands to them, we'll send a peace offer after they take it and just not have to worry about fighting there for a couple years, Like, they didn't care that much about the islands, it seems. And then after they would have that, they would just civil war again and take back the islands. That's kind of how Persia played things. But when this happened, this gave a show that Alexander was here to fight, and the great King Darius of Persia knew about Alexander. He knew he landed. He actually probably knew before they landed, because he just had, people everywhere. But he didn't
Downright
care.
Darius.
He wasn't worried. Yeah, if you play Civ, you remember Darius as the leader of Civ, and
Yep.
in Civ 6, Darius is the leader of Persia. He didn't care. He's like, this guy's not that big of a threat. Whatever, we'll just kill him. So he left the defense of Asia Minor to his satraps, who held the land under their control. And the first conflict would be a land today known as the Biga River, but back then it was known as the Granicus River. Macedonian forces with Alexander at the front would move in with a force of 12,000 infantry, including a group of elites known as his foot companions, and the legendary Hypastists, which were his elite team of infantry who were masters at wielding the large shield, in units of 500 men equipped with short spears, which was very unique for Greece at the time, because the short spear was a lot more efficient at close quarters combat opposed to the standard infantry's use of long spears known as sarissas,
Right.
which if you look up a sarissa is one of the biggest spears you'll ever see in your life. That is usually what they use, the troops used.
Yeah, you get those in Age of Mythology when you train hoplites and they're cheaper, and then Hyapasts later that are stronger.
Yeah, well, there you go. Hyapasts are Alexander the Great's elite infantry. They also carried Xiphos or Copus swords as their sidearms, so they had swords that needed them. They were also known to be Alexander's personal guard as well, so that's how good they were. In addition to this, he had 1,800 elite companion cavalry, with 1,800 normal Thessalian cavalry and 600 Greek cavalry. These are all heavy cavalry, so fully armored men on armored horses, and an additional unit of 900 light cavalry were present. So he fielded a total of 1,000 infantry, 5,100 cavalry, totaling 18,100 men. Sorry, 8,100 men. With them or with other Greek soldiers he had as well.
That's good. I mean, oof.
But you remember the numbers he first arrived with like 7,000 cavalry and almost 50,000 soldiers? This is just a small... He took his small army out. He made an army to go fight the Persians.
Oh my God.
So Persian numbers, much more sketchy, again, because the writers were Greek and had bias. But there was one famous writer named Arius. He was known to... He even said that he does not... He wrote down that he didn't bias his own work, which doesn't mean much. But... it's possible, and he does give a lot more realistic numbers in terms of things, so that's kind of the story I'm going with, is his numbers. So, most likely the Persians at this part of the battle had 20,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. And again, super debated, but that's what we're going with, those realistic numbers. But a good thing to note is that a lot of the infantry here are not Persian, they're Greek mercenaries. So... The Macedonian forces with Alexander were fighting Greek mercenary forces almost entirely as far as the infantry goes, but the Persians had all the cavalry. They were Persian-trained cavalry, 10,000 of them. So the story basically goes like this. Both forces were quiet on the battlefield, and then suddenly a cavalry charge was sent out by Macedonian's lead general of the cavalry on the flank, known Ptolemy, the son of Philip. He was a companion, and he had his cavalry and attack the Persians' far left wing, which was their cavalry, which were standing stationary at the base of a river. This may sound really dumb, because why would you have cavalry not moving at a river base? They can't charge. Yeah. The reason why, they had never heard of a cavalry charge before, because that wasn't Persian battle tactics. Persian battle tactics, what you did with cavalry was throw javelins and run back, and throw javelins and run back. That was how Persians used their cavalry.
So they weren't ready to just watch thousands of cavalry just roll over them like a wave?
No, they were not ready for this. Yeah. Cavalry had become very popular in Greek use at the time before this. If you can remember 300, there's no horses.
Oh, yeah.
So so cavalry was a more recent, big thing. And that was at the time, it's like when we found out tanks are powerful and built a ton of tanks. They're we need horses in Greece. So that was their big thing, right? Heavy cavalry got invented, and they were we need to make more heavy cavalry, which is why, the companion cavalry is so devastating. So the skirmishing javelin Persians did throw out large amounts of javelins, and they did, again, drastically outnumber Ptolemy's forces. So Ptolemy's cavalry were actually getting devastated by the Persian javelins and did have to retreat. So the Ptolemy's forces retreated and met up with Alexander, who then launched an attack on the center of the Persian army, which was mostly infantry, with his companion cavalry units. And we now believe historically this was an intentional retreat by Ptolemy because they used up their javelins. So now they didn't have ammunition, and then Alexander was able to charge into their line and meet their lightly armored cavalry head to head.
Yikes.
So what the cavalry are known to have torn through the cavalry and Persian foot soldiers, who also, the horses threw their javelins and charged the Macedonian forces, which drove them out of position. So once again, the same tactic was used before to draw them out, was used again very successfully. And during this battle, a melee broke out because of the Macedonian charge. And the good thing to point out is the Macedonians had a lance called the Xyston, which was unique to Macedon at the time, which is much stronger in a melee battle and outclassed the Persian javelin in range and durability almost tenfold.
Damn.
The son-in-law...
Is that lightweight? What's going on?
It was a heavy lance as opposed to a Persian javelin, which is for throwing. So they weren't used for throwing. They had actual cavalry weapons. The son-in-law of the great king Darius, Mithridates, was at this battle, leading forces, and led a cavalry unit, and he was spotted by Alexander. Alexander charged Mithridates and plunged a lance through his head.
Oh, that's no good.
Another high-ranking Persian noble named Rosaces was here, who also tried to kill Alexander from behind and tried to lance him through the head, but fortunately, Alexander was wearing a helmet, and it bounced off his head. Alexander was able to respond to this and kill Rosaces with his lance in personal combat. And a third high-ranking Persian, whose name we don't know, it's actually because there's like 3 different names given for this dude, tried to attack Alexander, but his companion, Cletus the Black, cut off the guy's sword arm before he could make contact.
Damn.
At this point, with all these leaders and generals and nobles dead, the Macedonian forces had won the day, and Persian forces began to retreat. The infantry was being slaughtered by the superior companion cavalry, and while having lost multiple leaders, there was basically no chance of their morale, which actually took a large contingent of Greek mercenaries by surprise, because they were actually out of position the entire battle, being used as reserve, because they thought there was no reason they would ever have to fight because they were so outnumbered. Which what this did was it actually allowed the Greek forces to take these mercenaries by surprise, and they were actually flanked by the foot companions. So his infantry unit of Hyspasus that we talked before flanked the Greek mercenaries and allegedly slaughtered the entire one to the last. So there was no survivors of the entire Greek mercenary company, which I guess if they were being paid by the Persians makes sense. You don't want them to come back.
Yeah.
The scribes noted at the time that the losses of the battle on the Macedonian side was 25 companions, 60 cavalry, and 30 infantry for 115 dead Macedonians. The Persians lost 1,000 cavalry, 2,000 Greek mercenaries, and apparently an entire company of Greek mercenaries was killed as well, which would be 2,000 to 3,000 more men. And if this is accurate, that means the casualties were 115 for Macedonia and 6,000 for Persia.
It's a lot.
That is a big difference, and it may seem impossible or inflated, but it's actually more likely than you might expect, because the Persians were really bad soldiers. Like you see 300 happened, this is way after the Battle of 300. Right. It's like you saw how bad Persian soldiers were. They're under-equipped, they're under-trained, and there's just a ton of them.
That's the idea, is numbers.
And these elite cavalry the companion cavalry are probably much stronger than Spartan warriors. Honest. Like they were probably much better. And they were heavy cavalry, so they were just able to crush these dudes like nothing. And another thing that also makes this more likely is there was 3,000 slaves sent back to Greece from this battle. Which means that's how many men were captured alone, not defeated. So there was a lot of people that were killed in that battle.
Jesus.
So what this battle did, which is why I went into detail for it, which a lot of things don't go into detail for this battle, but what this did was not only show them how dangerous Alexander was, but this allowed Alexander to now enter Turkey and claim city after city with their massive army defeated. This loss soldier number wise, was by no means disastrous for Persia. They didn't honestly care that much, as thousands of soldiers did actually even retreat and make it back to Halicarnassus, which is one of their most defended cities.
Right.
So they did get a lot of their soldiers back. But what this did do was a huge strategic outcome for Alexander's, because they actually took a city called Sardis, which if you look up the history of Sardis, it had never been taken until this battle and was famously untakeable. And Alexander just marched right in and took it. And the big deal about taking Sardis is this opened the path directly to Halicarnassus, which was the capital of the Turkish region under Persian control, which also controlled the entire naval forces for the Persians in the Mediterranean Sea. And if you basically took Halicarnassus, that means you basically controlled Asia Minor, aka Turkey. So that is a big deal for him to be outside the gates of that. And that is where we're going to stop talking about Alexander's campaign today.
Oh, okay.
Probably,
Good Lord.
yeah.
He's only, 20 years old at
20
this
years
point?
old.
21?
20, yeah. 20-year-old man. And honestly,
started a couple musicals by the time I was 20.
This trend of him kind of dominating isn't going to stop.
Yeah.
If you don't know, he's famous for never being defeated. So, spoiler for the future, the next part of this. But
he doesn't lose.
And something I wanted to highlight, because this is the first one of this kind of series I'm doing, is that he was able to win multiple battles and not even fight multiple battles because of how quickly his cavalry was able to move into cities. Like I mentioned, having kind of like a standing cavalry army. That is going to be a trend throughout history of our entire species. Things like the Blitzkrieg.
Right.
Things like that. That is the biggest. That's how you win wars. That's how you win wars. The Mongols did it too. That's how you win. That is literally the defining factor. If you get in quick and fast, you win. And he's going to be doing that for the rest of his life, which will continue in the next episode of Alexander, which I think I'll do next week just to wrap it up, because it's just going to be a two-parter. But maybe we'll do something in between. We'll see. We'll see. Everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out with me. Let me nerd out of control.
Yeah, well, always.
You too, Pat. I'll see you soon.
Bye.
I'll see everyone soon.